I appreciate you joining me today. We're going to be looking in Galatians 5 at the works of the flesh and the fruit of the Spirit today. Our hymn is called Clay in the Potter's Hand. Okay, let's look in our passage now. Galatians 5 at verse 16 says, I say then, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lusts of the flesh. For the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary to one another, so that you do not do the things that you wish. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Now the works of the flesh are evident, which are adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, dissensions, heresies, envy, murders, drunkenness, revelries, and the like, of which I tell you beforehand, just as I told you in time past, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law. And those who are Christ's have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. And we'll go ahead and stop there. You know, you might ask yourself the question, why is it describing things in this contrast of the works of the flesh and fruit? You know, both are things that we do. You know, adultery is something that is done. Well, long-suffering is also something that is done. I think sometimes people see verse 19, you know, and they just see works. Well, not all works are works of the flesh. You know, in James chapter 2, it talks about how a man is justified by faith in works. Are those works of the flesh? No. You know, Jesus in the Gospels talks about this is the work of God, that you believe on Him or in Him whom He sent. I can't remember exactly how it phrases it, but it talks about how faith is described as a work. It's something that we do. And so why, in the passage, why not just say these are the works of the flesh and these are the works of the Spirit? Well, I think the point, and the reason I have works of the flesh highlighted and not just works, I think the reason is because one course of action is selfish, and the other course of action is selfless. With one, it's just about, you know, it talks about in the apostasy that men will be lovers of themselves and lovers of pleasure. You know, you have that verse. And so you have those who are led by the Spirit, and I think that's the point. One looks beyond oneself, and the other does not. The works of the flesh do not look beyond themselves. It's just about self-gratification and other issues. But the fruit of the Spirit, you're being led by the Spirit. You're walking in the Spirit. And so it is not trusting in yourself. It's not following yourself. It's following what the Lord has revealed. Now, ultimately, both of these are manifestations. Verse 19, the works of the flesh are evident. They are manifest. And the fruit of the Spirit is also manifest. But it really is a question of simply who you're following, what you're following. Worldliness or things of the Spirit. That's really what it is. Carnality, or being carnally minded or spiritually minded. Okay, the second point I'd like to make is that there in verse 23, and it does it in both lists. Verse 23, against such there is no law. With the fruit of the Spirit, it says, those who practice such things. There in verse 21. But just to dwell on the fruit of the Spirit, made the point before, it's not meant to be an exhaustive list. And that there may be other things that could be considered fruit of the Spirit that are not within that list. We made that point before, but we've never specified any, so I thought we might consider just a few. You might think about hope, hopefulness. Would that be classified as the fruit of the Spirit? I think so. You might think about forgiveness. Now, could that be found in certain ones of those attributes? Possibly, in long suffering. But it goes beyond just being long suffering. Forgiveness does. I was thinking about the passage in the Old Testament, a merry heart does good like a medicine. Would that be considered the fruit of the Spirit? I think so. How about, and this is an odd one, how about anger? Could anger be classified as the fruit of the Spirit? It depends on what kind of anger. The wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. But what about righteous indignation? Jesus, when he was about to heal a certain man, can't remember if he healed him or if he had already healed him or he was going to, but he asks those around him the question, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath? And they would not answer him. And he looked around at them with anger. He was angry at the hardness of their hearts. Ephesians says, be angry but do not sin. And so that sort of anger that we are called to have, even if the situation calls for it, would that be classified as a fruit of the Spirit? I think so. You might also think about a spirit of restoration. In the very next chapter, it says, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness. So the ability to rebuke sin and the desire to rebuke sin, could that be found in the fruit of the Spirit? I think so. So you might think about all of those and other things as well. You might have other things to add to your list. But it's not meant to be an exhaustive list. Now, last point I wanted to make is, if we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. And that what we're really talking about is walking by faith. And that means it is something that we must do. I think that's the point. If you live in the Spirit, what do you got to do? You got to walk in the Spirit. You got to be led by the Spirit. This is about how we live our lives on a day-to-day basis. See, some people, they look at that concept, which is the concept of obedience. And it is the concept of works. Not the works of the flesh, but the works that God has prepared beforehand for us. Ephesians 2. We were created for good works. And we have to work. That's what we were created for. It fulfills what the Lord has made us for. The passage is Ephesians 2. We might look at it tomorrow, or at least nearby it. But all of these things, as it goes together, it all feeds into clay in the potter's hand. And to just think about that concept of I am the clay, Make of my life as pleases thee each day. Weave into beauty as you have it planned. Make me as clay in the potter's hand. Appreciate you. Hope you have a good day. Join us tomorrow for another portion of our daily praise.